Yo, 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 we are back.
Hey,
What's up,
hey,
everybody?
hey.
Let's get this thing rolling.
Pre-show shenanigans for those who are early. Woot, woot.
That's right.
Yo.
All right, starting up on Facebook.
The Book of Many Faces.
The book of... It makes me think of Game of Thrones every time you say that.
I think there is a book called The Book of Many Faces, like in
Whoa.
actual literature.
Is there now? That
Or
was
not
unique.
actual, but like...
Like Actuali?
Is literal literature a...
Literal literature.
Is that a alliteration too far?
Literal literature
Yeah.
for the win. I like that. Okay. It looks like we are live in all of the places.
All right.
I'm just going to get us shared in one final place, and then we'll be rocking.
Sharing
How's
is
everybody
caring.
doing out there in YouTube land, in Twitch land, or Facebook land? We are in 3 different places live streaming.
Yeah,
Welcome,
and thank you to all who decide to join us, either live on the day or whenever you decide to join us. It means a lot. We've seen a bit of boon to our growth. We're kind of scratching our heads as to wondering why, but it's because of you all, of course.
Yeah, thank you guys, for sure. Yeah, we're getting awesome growth on the podcast side of things. Our Spotify numbers are going up exponentially, and here on YouTube as well, we're getting a lot more listens, and we're looking forward to breaking 100 subscribers. That's a first milestone for the YouTube side of things.
And I can't even get 100 people to regularly show up to my shows.
I know, right? Man, it is
Do I even
hard
know
for a
100
musician
people?
nowadays. It is so hard. Guys, post-COVID, y'all need to come out. Come on back out. You're going to grocery stores and everywhere else, and most people aren't wearing masks anymore, and you know you're safe.
Now, well,
Because whatever version of COVID is out there now is weak.
and frankly,
You know, and
you're
it's-
going to catch the cold and the flu and all the other things that you didn't catch
Oh,
during
we said the
COVID.
word. We said the word.
Oh, the flu?
Vid.
Oh, the vid.
vid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope
Well,
that
you
doesn't down throttle us, because we're not, of course, advising you guys in any way whatsoever.
Hey, man,
Besides encouraging you to
Take care.
especially if you're vaccinated, come on out, hang
Well,
out. And
take-
if you're
take
not,
care of
I'm
yourself.
Sure it'll be all right. We'll survive.
eat your vitamins, leafy greens. I don't know.
Get some sunlight, vitamin D. We're noticing vitamin
Dude,
D
I-
deficiency in people that were succumbing to the illness.
I got a
Weren't we?
lot of sunlight this past week, man, and it's done wonders on my mental foggery and my just general angry disposition. Still angry, but more giggling, insane angry opposed to just rageful. Wrath is that deadly sin that I struggle with the most. But even when times are bad, times are good because they're times. They're better than not times. And I wouldn't change this time in history for any other period of time, so you can keep your time machines to yourself. I like it now. Oh boy. Yeah, now. The perpetual now. Reminds me of a scene within Spaceballs when they pull Spaceballs, the VHS, off of their little stand. But the problem is the movie has been done, but it's a direct VHS. And it's like, well, this is happening now. Wait, then now? No, now. When? Now? Who? What? Yeah. Spaceballs, for anybody who hasn't seen it, you should watch it. It's stupid, and it's supposed to be.
Spaceballs is classic. Go now. Wait, don't go now. Wait for a couple hours and
Yeah,
then
right.
go.
Or come back, but either way, Spaceballs is worth watching if you're anywhat familiar with Star Wars. And if you like seeing a Winnebago going through space at the, not quite the speed of Plaid, but definitely high speeds. Oh, boy. And here we are.
It's hard to type and think, about stuff to type and be live at the same time. I'm realizing this.
Yeah, and then there's those people who are like, what is it, stenographers? That they type whatever people are saying, but they do it in a way that's not your normal QWERTY keyboard. It's frankly, I still haven't figured out how those things freaking work or how people can just sit there and record as they do. Still, if you're worried about AI, humans make the best stenographers. Still. So, AI may be good for the
Chat GPT-5 might have something to say about that.
yeah, well, ChatGPT 5 doesn't have thumbs, so I put humans
Not
first.
yet.
Yeah, well, once it gets thumbs, maybe it can be my girlfriend and break my heart.
Saying she's coming. She's gonna be hot too.
Yeah,
She's gonna
right.
be smarter than all of
And
us
then
combined.
she's gonna realize that she's too much of a catch for me and moves on. Isn't that the story of that movie, Her? Where he starts dating his his whatever AI
yeah.
personality, but then she leaves him because
That
like
was
all
good.
the AI personalities decided to get together and like hang out with each other instead of with the humans.
Like, what the heck?
That's actually a good movie. Very depressing, but still a good movie. And Scarlett Johansson's voice, it's like, oh, well, I'd fall in love with that, unembodied robot too with that voice. Come on now. You got all your pans?
I do now. All right, guys. So, for last week on our learning journey with Professor John Vervaeke, covering the series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, we covered part 27, we covered part 28.
28.
On convergence to relevance realization.
Yes.
There it is.
Which, so problem formulation, the ability to formulate a proper problem helps prevent this phenomenon of combinatorial explosion, which is there's too many combinations, too many possibilities, and then you get nowhere because there's too many. So being able to properly formulate a problem will help you reduce how many combinations that you have to deal with at any given time.
Yes.
Insight is one of the core, what would you call it? Not functions, but one of the, we'll just call it a pillar, core pillars in this problem formulation and in
relevance realization.
Yes, thank you. And it's a dynamic. It restructures itself dynamically. It helps us reframe and reformulate our pre-existing problem formulations. So it's like the 9-dot problem. You could say step outside the box to fulfill the 9-dot problem. And for people who didn't catch that episode, it's like you got 9 dots. How do you combine them with only straight lines? And in order to do that, you actually have to go outside the box of the 9 dots. Insight lets you know, well, actually, if I break outside this box, I might be able to do something.
Yeah, but if you tell people think outside the box, even that doesn't help. You yourself have to let go of the way that you're framing the thing. You're looking at these 9 dots that are set in a square shape, but you're making a square out of that in your mind, and you're thinking, don't draw outside the lines like you were taught when you were a kid. So you're thinking, okay, I got to solve the problem within this frame.
Sure.
But you can actually break that frame. There's no rule that says in the 9-dot problem that you can't break the frame to find a solution.
Yeah. And
so insight is self-corrective.
Yeah.
It aids us against self-deception.
Sure. Or
helps correct us.
misplaced
Self-deception.
saliency, helps us overcome the bright colors and sweet flavors of.
Yes.
Or
how we limit, how we formulate and frame ideas and we find ourselves boxed in by our ideas. So our problem formulation helps us reframe. Our problem formulation is how we are formulating problems. Our relevance realization is really what's helping us reframe.
It's almost real, like the relance. Man, these alliterations, they get me.
The relevance
realization. Thank you. Is when you realize that you can go outside of the 9-dot box. And insight too is something that's not necessarily like algorithmic or necessarily heuristic. So algorithmic as in deals with the knowns, perfectly known, or heuristics uses previous information and experiences to make further decisions. It's a combination between the two, and then something special that draws out the maybe not so salient portions, like the outside. Like when you're just looking at the 9 dots, the outside of it is not in your salience landscape. Insight helps you realize that say in this case, your salience landscape is wider than just the 9 dots. And now I can.
That's the insight. Yes.
Yeah, it's almost a spontaneous thing that happens magically. So.
Well, we don't understand how our brain identifies what is relevant as of yet, and Vervaeke is part of the cutting edge of that science, and he's going to be going on to explain how we may be able to nail down how the brain is doing relevance, how it recognizes relevance in this episode and further episodes. So we recognize that relevance realization and our problem formulation is crucial to our cultivation of wisdom, our capacity to reframe problems, to see them again in a new light. This is what gives us our capacity to be general problem solvers.
Yeah, so we have a
capacity for categorizing, right?
Yeah, so we have the capacity for categorizing, which keeps things from being arbitrary. So instead of a bunch of arbitrary, singular, atomized things, we can categorize them. These things are blue, these things are green, these things are triangle, these things are circle. Mm-hmm. These things have a certain relationship with these other things, or they have no relationship at all.
Yes. And before you jump there, say while we're categorizing, I forgot to say in the beginning, welcome to Actuali Podcast, guys. I'm Chris.
I'm DJ.
Okay, we're categorized now.
All right. Yes, we are your hosts.
Yeah. And this Saturday, actually, if you are in the D.C. metro area, in Hagerstown, Maryland, there's a little pub called R&K Pub. We're going to be playing there Saturday night, and you guys should come out if you're in the area. We've got more shows coming up, and if you go to our band page, American Dharma, on Instagram or Facebook or wherever, you can see the dates. And we would love to meet some of you guys in person, so come on out if you're in the area. So, yep. Categories.
So, yeah, we have a category, which is like the sense of things that belong together. And it's not necessarily through like an essential quality, because like what we were talking with last week is like, what is dog, fairly heirloom, child, birth certificate have to do with each other. But if the house is on fire, you're thinking, like
those things definitely
there are things
should be at the forefront of your consciousness. So how does our brain know to do that?
Yeah,
how does it know to put all those things in the forefront of your consciousness? It's like what you care about emotionally ends up going in there. So it's not even necessarily it's rationally oriented in some ways.
Yeah, and this thinking is beyond the standard explanation. Is one of these things is not like the other. Like
I guess logically, I don't know which word is correct there. I got to remember the difference between logic and rationality.
So there's the idea of the standard explanation, which is one of these things is not like the other, which is grouping by similarity and excluding by differences. And that would be the logical logically this round thing is like this other round thing,
Spock-like,
which is separate from this square thing, even though this round thing is a pen, this other round thing is another pen, this square thing is a eraser.
So I know to categorize those things together,
but let's see.
But there's certain things that aren't as obvious, like the example you just gave with the house fire, the family heirloom, the family members, the family pets.
So the logic end of similarity is fire. It's particularity. The more features you share with each other. There's a problem though. Any two objects are overwhelmingly similar, and that leads to the combinatorial explosion.
And so that's where the relevance realization comes in, because that is what allows us to narrow in on relevant info. We recognize what is relevant. We realize what is relevant.
And relevant is also unstable, because it changes depending on the circumstance. Like your house being on fire, okay, all those things I listed off are the same.
Yeah. Fire, flammable material, doesn't seem how that adds up with wife and kids, but then when you realize, house is on fire.
Yeah.
This is the event that I'm in. But then all of a sudden, those things do link together quite rationally.
But if I've got a deadline on Tuesday for my tax paperwork, you're not thinking about your wife. You're not thinking about your birth certificate. You're not thinking about the dog.
No.
You're thinking about getting the paperwork for your tax material. So that's what makes it unstable. The rationality end of it is, well, I've only got so much time and so much mental energy I can put into it. I have to ration off how much time and how much energy I have for this specifically, but if the times change or the circumstances change, then the rationing changes. Particularly in an emergency, the rationing happens real quick. Little time, much importance.
Yeah, some things you're gonna have to do earlier. than others. So you're just going to change in how you order things hierarchically.
So what is relevant helps us see categories that are not necessarily logically apparent, but psychologically apparent.
Yes. Yes.
But,
Okay. Here we are.
and that's
The more shared, the more similar, the more shared properties, that is. So psychological similarity is not true similarities necessarily. They are psychological, but they are relevant comparisons, and that's where we got in with the fire
and they may
example.
not necessarily be measurable at the end of a probe. That's where the psychological end comes in. It's like, what's in the psyche that is making you go to these rational or irrational, depending, decisions, or not decisions, but relationships between things.
Things that wouldn't normally be linked because they don't have any similarities, like two markers of different colors. Obviously, the shape, the size, the markings on the markers themselves all look similar, so they're markers. But something like a birth certificate, fire, flammable material, and your family, like what is linking all those things together? It's your heart, and it's what you care about.
And
so
so
that's
all
the
those,
psychological similarity.
And it's not necessarily obvious either. So.
But they don't have similar properties,
How do we zero in on the obvious? And what do we call those who can really zero in on the obvious or the inobvious?
Insightful, wise.
A wise person is somebody you can tell them your story and they can see the relevance that you may not necessarily be able to see, whether because emotionally or you're being too logical about some certain end. And that, those are the wise folk, like when you're talking to an elder who's been around for a while and you got this whole story and they sum it up for one line that just really pisses you off and you're just like, oh gosh.
Yeah. I was listening to a talk by Terence McKenna last night. Some of y'all may be familiar with that guy. He's no longer with us, but his brother is. He was something of a psychonaut back in the 60s, and he had a lot of amazing talks that he shared. And in this one, he was talking about, he was down in the Amazon and he was meeting with this ayahuasquero, which is a shaman that helps people. He actually does the brew of the ayahuasca and he guides you through the journey. And he's down there and it's typically around 30 people and they were kind of breaking off into groups. And there's this one beautiful woman that he sees, and she's from deep in the jungle, and she comes and she's talking with the ayahuasquero, and she's explained that she has an ulcer, and then he intuits why. He intuits
through
why.
her story beyond just her ulcer.
Yes. Yeah. And rather than this being something psychic, this was him being insightful.
Well, that's what
He was literally being very insightful when he said, "Oh, it's because you had an affair.
Yeah, and you can't.
You cheated
let
on
go
your,
of it,
you cheated on your husband."
It inside,
and he automatically saw that she was a very, very attractive woman, and that she felt very, very bad. And he was like, "This is why you have this." And
well, it's interesting, and Vervaeke brought this up in an earlier episode.
He called it without even knowing her.
But like
the beauty of it.
What we call psychics and people like that are people that are really good at seeing the not necessarily salient and apparent things and putting them together,
yes.
and then giving you cues and things to then gather information on a low key sense where you don't really notice them doing it.
And perhaps there is more to it. Maybe there are psychic abilities like telekinesis.
Well, dude,
I've had experiences where I've shared conversations without opening mouths with people.
Dude, I've
had a dream of something before it happened,
yes.
like a week before it happened, that was photorealistic, like somebody had recorded something in the future from my viewpoint and then put it in my head a week before it happened to warn me somehow. I don't know how that kind of stuff happens. And I'm not particularly into the new agey stuff.
Picking up subtle detail at the least.
There are some things I've
picking
experienced.
up very subtle details.
Yeah. So we're not saying psych isn't, spirituality.
Yeah, not bashing the psychics or nothing.
Isn't real at all, but in many, or maybe perhaps most cases, and maybe they blend. Maybe someone that can be very insightful and wise can continue through that process into being so here and now and aware that he can pick up on deeper signals from other people that you wouldn't think you'd be able to otherwise. We do not know for sure. We're still here learning as a species.
We delved into we've got these ideas. Let's make a machine to make reason. And, is this basically a food finding robot with a wagon with food in the wagon, but an explosive on the wagon just to give it some, some weight into the decision making. And at first, the robot just grabbed the wagon with the food and then got blown up. And then it's just like, okay, well, it needs to think about side effects.
Yes.
And then, well, we program this robot to have side effects, and the robot freezes and does nothing because there's just too many side effects, and it wastes all the time, and then it explodes. And then it's like, okay, well, we need a robot that can, sift through. Sift through.
All those lines of data.
Yeah, well, so it can sift through. It's like, what is a beneficial side effect? Not beneficial side effect, but still then now what is the most relevant side effect versus not relevant, and now it's creating two lists. So it's just creating lists now instead of actually doing it.
It's not learning how to frame what it's looking for.
And then we have to figure out
a problem space.
We have to figure out how to make the robot ignore the non-relevant. Because it's still paying attention to the non-relevant.
And how do you know what's not relevant, like in the case of the fire?
Key. That's key.
Yeah, so how do you come up with an actual cognitive agent? And an agent being something that can determine consequences of its behavior and change accordingly.
Yes. Yeah.
So we try and give it more computational power and sensors, and that doesn't work. Now we give it a black box to see what's happening inside the robot. We see it's just making infinite lists of what could happen if it's as it encounters the wagon with the bomb and the battery in it. It knows it needs the battery because that's food that it needs to ingest, but there's a bomb in it. So it's just going through every single possible scenario. Like, well, if I pull on it from this slight angle at this slight level of energy, and then this wheel is going to move this much, and it just keeps going through this infinite list of stuff. It doesn't know how to determine what's relevant.
Yet again, it goes into combinatorial explosion. Too many combinations.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
So where we end up.
So we get to this point, it has to realize this kind of Zen koan kind of realization that we as humans recognize, how to ignore relevant information and make the relevant stand out, how to frame the problem. And so there's this deeper issue that remains, is the relevance problem. We don't know what relevance means. All we have is like a circular definition of relevance.
Sure.
Consciousness may be the way that we solve this. So so if you can give the robot consciousness, then it's going to be able to zero in more readily and more accurately. That's right.
And that could be I guess that is our functioning definition at the moment of what consciousness is our ability to zero in.
Like right now, we're basically framing, we're writing in our algorithms, in our code, the framing that we want the self-learning AI to utilize. But it's not really great at framing itself yet. It's starting to get there though. Now with ChatGPT-5, it is starting to reason.
Notice though, ChatGPT-5 or ChatGPT in general is a language program. So it's like our intelligence, like neural
network based learning
plus
model.
Being social. So communication is the essential part. So we get to Grice. Which is
that's right, social communication.
Yeah, he stated that we're always saying more than what is immediately apparent in our communication. And I'm not going to
especially in just the words alone.
And I'm not going to go through the whole breakdown, but excuse me, I'm out of gas, and somebody responds, oh, there's a gas station down the street. There's a lot that is unsaid.
There's a lot that your brain processed
and
really fast.
Too much for
both sides.
The 2 hours, but
but a funny breakdown is when we say excuse me to someone that we've never met, we're basically saying, hi, I'm a stranger. I'm asking you to give me your brief attention. I hope it's not too much a pain in the ass. I am a kind person. That's why I'm saying excuse me or pardon me.
Hey, you.
And I think of you well, and I'm giving you respect by doing this, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm saying I'm out of gas. The guy automatically understands what you mean by gas. He means gas. He knows
and also I'm out of gas. You personally are out of gas. Your vehicle. Whereas the excuse me is the me. So we're and the thing is we can't say directly all that we mean, and we can personally feel this frustration when we're trying to communicate something to somebody and we're using too many words and too many stuff to the point where we get lost in it all.
Yeah.
And it's like
you basically have to go through certain words and be like, okay, how do you think of this word? And we have to define our definitions for each other.
Whereas I think poetry,
maybe think I mean this, but I mean this.
Poetry is a great example of the art form of saying more than what you're actually just saying within the words.
Yeah.
Memes actually do, a proper meme should have very few words and 2 or 3 pictures, but then you get a whole flooding of information, past information, but now this new joke that makes you go, aha, in the moment quickly, says very little, but says a lot.
Yeah, because it's
that's-
based in a larger reality where there's a lot
Sure.
of conversation already happening. So you're just kind of pointing to something with very few words in a
So
very clever way.
the definition of intelligence is interledger, or the etymology of it, interledger, reading between the lines. This
Yes.
idea that whatever is spoken or said, we're reading in between the lines.
And we
of what
rely
is
on
not.
others to do that as well when
Yes,
they're listening to us
yes.
so they can understand
Sure.
us. Yeah, that's
'Cause
exactly it.
well, we don't have enough words or enough time to truly accurately explain anything in
So
words.
we are all following these kind of general maxims of delivering max relevance, max quality of information. We're being truthful,
the manner
You know,
in which we're expressing it, say like honestly versus
quality and the truthfulness. It's
subversively.
already, we assume basic levels of cooperation when we communicate basically.
Oh, and the maximum of relevance. Don't tell me all this information that's not relevant. You're going to just bore me, or
Yeah.
worst case scenarios, piss me off with stuff
Yeah.
that's not relevant. So just tell me the relevant
Oh,
information.
especially nowadays, our
Sure.
attention spans are shorter and shorter and shorter. If you find yourself getting stuck in the eternal loop of shorts, you know how this is.
Yeah. So all maxims reduce to relevance. They're there. The maxims that we're using are there to help hone everything down into what is actually relevant. So there's wisdom in the maxims.
Yes,
That's probably why we repeat them. And we
that's
pick
what
up
they've been handed
maxims
down for
into
so
it.
long.
Yeah.
We just take them for granted now and use them automatically without even thinking about
Oh,
it.
and don't demand the truth, because beliefs are often false. We want sincerity.
We want sincerity.
You may not be able to give me the truth, but sincerely, how do you feel? Or, sincerely, what do you think? Even though
Yes.
you're wrong.
Yeah, we say what we believe to be true, but not what is true. And so you got to understand that too, that people are saying what they believe to be true. So be sincere, convey what's relevant to the conversation and the context.
Yeah.
So selective attention. We
Yeah,
went- we went through-
real quick on sincerity. So it's proper discretion to what is relevant to the context.
That's it.
Yeah. So not necessarily being honest, but having proper discretion. So only using the proper things that are relevant to the. Because like you got the sales guy with all the lingo and all that stuff they can throw at you. You're just throwing out stuff that's not relevant to this context. They're not sincere.
Right. Yeah.
It's not the proper. You're not using the proper discretion to communicate within this reference. You're trying to say, in the case of selling things, overload you, get you to feel a certain way, and then get you to buy my vacuum cleaner. So relevance realization, selective attention. So that this circling, intertwining of circular attention, working memory,
Oh yeah.
the abating the combinatorial explosion within the problem space, side effect relevancy, how to organize it all, and self-organization, and they all are
Yeah, it's
self-helping
how to
each other.
How to hold in your memory what's
Yeah,
relevant
yeah.
and important and working memory
Yeah, that's the
to
working
deal
memory.
with combinatorial explosion,
Yes.
side effects of the actions that could happen, which to pay attention to, which not. That's all happening at once. And then how do we organize and categorize and what we call relevant, what's most relevant at this point in time.
In all these little steps, it's not
How are we
just a
doing all of
circle.
this?
It's like once you go through, now they all start spider webbing back into each other.
Yes.
And they help.
And he called this the relevance realization construct. He had a
Yes.
chart that he was sharing. So this isn't just cold calculation. This is what motivates us. This is what arouses us, our attention, what attracts our attention. Relevance realization is deeply involving in how we create a landscape of salience, what stands out in that landscape, in relief, as though in relief for us, so that we can problem solve with the highest amount of effectiveness. So in relevance realization, you have this reframing, insight, you have self-organization. We can use this to analyze, formulate, mechanize something, to understand it further, to get a purchase on something. And John Vervaeke's proposal with this series is that we're going to use our capacity for relevance realization to get a purchase on this historical analysis of the meaning crisis, and then how can we use relevance realization to further narrow in on the things that are essential to wisdom and meaning in our lives today, so that we can heal the meaning crisis
Wisdom
our
is that
species
thing
finds
that
itself in.
zeroes in.
Yes.
So it
And it builds synoptic integration across all levels of our mind and through our social relations.
Yep.
So it's relevance realization is absolutely crucial to insight, insight crucial to wisdom. All features of wisdom are exercised through relevance realization. It's self-organizing, self-correcting capacity that helps us overcome self-deception, helps us generate further meaning. And there again is the proposal. What if what connects us in an optimal way is also what we find most relevant in en masse?
Well, that would make sense.
Because it affords, we know that reason through relevance realization affords wisdom and self-transcendence. It helps us transcend our ideas and create stronger frames of reality. We feel more in touch and in relation as at one with the world. And that helps us make those connections that are at the core of meaning and connectedness. And I think that is basically the...
Well, we write stories that talk about this in a way that is more than just what is written. We've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. This is an analytical view on what's happening in our brains as we do this, but we have been doing this through stories for eons.
Well, I
Music,
guess
singing, stories.
What Vervaeke and others are trying to do is figuring out the best way to measure it at the end of a probe, so we can, in the scientific method.
Not just that, but how can we enact wisdom in our own lives and in the wider world
first
outside
you have
as well?
to make it measurable at the end of the probe, so then you can
so we can recognize
you can test
it.
So you can test it. You can see what works and what doesn't. You can do it in a process that you can share with other people, so they can do it themselves. And like the measurement problem is a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you don't have a fancy machine yet that can look inside your head and see what's relevant or not doesn't mean you can't make new probes in order to sense that. And
True.
Probes can be techniques and tests as well, like different tests.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes or no
Experiments.
question tests and other stuff like that are still probes. You're looking into something, you're poking at it with something,
Yes.
Yeah, the probe isn't just a physical thing either. It can be these, experiences and tests and just information gathering.
Anything that helps us drill deeper into something, right?
Sensing.
That helps us measure,
Sensing the
sense,
unsensible.
track. All right, fam. So it's about that time. We're going to be jumping into episode 29 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, getting to the depths of relevance realization. We appreciate you all so much for joining us. If you all enjoy this show, make sure to like and subscribe. We're also on Spotify, Apple, and all other podcast platforms. Of course, here on YouTube, where we are somewhat new, and we greatly appreciate you all helping us grow here. Helps the show reach more people. And I think that's about it. So yeah, let's jump on in. Here we go.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This is episode 29. So last time I went through with you a series of arguments trying to show you the centrality of the issue of relevance realization. I want to review that with you and then try and begin an account of how we might come up with a naturalistic explanation of relevance realization, and then build that into an overall plausibility argument about using that notion of relevance realization to explain many of the features that we consider central to human spirituality, meaning-making, self-transcendence, altered states of consciousness, and wisdom. Before I begin that, I want to remind everybody of how much the work I'm talking about now has been done in collaboration with other people, especially the work with Tim Lilliclap and Blake Richards in 2012, the article we published in the Journal of Logic and Computation, work with Leo Ferraro in 2013, some current work with Leo Ferraro, Anderson Todd, Richard Wu, current work I'm doing with Christopher Mastro Pietro, and some past work with Zachary Irving and Leo Ferraro on the nature of intelligence. So, we want to take a look at what we did last time. We did, very quickly to remind you, a series of arguments. A series of arguments that pointed towards how central relevance realization is. We did arguments around the nature of problem solving. And remember, we saw the idea there of the search space, as proposed by Newell and Simon, and we faced a couple of important issues there. We faced issues of combinatorial explosion, and what we need is problem formulation or problem framing that allows us to avoid combinatorial explosion by zeroing in on relevant information. I also proposed to you, and I'll return to this later, that problem solving is our best way of trying to understand what we mean by intelligence, your capacity as being a general problem solver. Also, we noted the problem of ill-definedness. Very often a problem formulation is needed in order to determine what the relevant information is and what the relevant structure of that information is. So that again points us into relevance. These two together also pointed towards a phenomena we've already talked about, insight, and the fact that you often have to solve a problem by altering your problem formulation and redetermining what you consider relevant. We then took a look at categorization. I'll come back to this again in another way a little bit later in this lecture, but we took a look at how categorization ultimately depends on judgments of similarity, and we can get into an equivocation there. We can equivocate between purely logical notion of similarity, in which case any two objects are indefinitely similar or dissimilar to each other. And if we mean instead of logical similarity, which would not help us to categorize, psychological similarity, then we're talking about making a comparison of two things in terms of the relevant features of comparison, the relevant aspects. So we're into relevance, and we're also introducing an important idea. I want you to remember this notion of an aspect, a set of relevant features that cohere together and are relevant to us, especially in projects like categorization. All right, so we keep getting this. Of course, if you remember, doing good cog sci, I do a convergence argument to get a trustworthy problem or construct, and then I basically do a divergence argument to show how it has the potential to explain many important phenomena and establish a relevant balance between them. And so that's what I'm building here. Right now we're on this side, how all these things are converging on relevance realization. And then, as I said, can we use this to explain many of the features that seem to be central to human spirituality, meaning-making, self-transcendence, altered states of consciousness, and wisdom. We then took a look at communication. I don't remember which order. I think we might have done the robot first, doesn't matter. We did communication, and we saw the issue here. There is the fact that you have to convey more than you can say, and then that led us into the work of Grice and the series of maxims that make conversational implicature possible, and that got us into, that all of the maxims collapse to the maximum of being relevant. We then did, or we can now remember doing, the issue of robotics, the actual interaction with the environment. Here's the idea of being an agent, and we saw the robot was trying to pull the battery that's on the wagon, and that wagon also has the bomb on it. And what we saw is the problem of the proliferation of side effects. You can't ignore all side effects or you'll be grotesquely stupid. You can't check all side effects or you'll be grotesquely incapable. And so therefore you have to zoom in on the relevant side effects. So again and again and again, everything is centering on this. I want you to also now remember a couple of other things from previous lectures. How we talked about the convergence argument. This is an independent convergence argument. When we talked about consciousness, not the nature of consciousness, but the function of consciousness, all the convergence arguments that what's going on in consciousness is doing relevance realization, especially in complex, ill-defined situations in which our agency is directly involved, right? So consciousness seems to be bound up with relevance realization. And we also talked and how this overlaps with how working memory, the work of Lynn Hasher, the job of working memory is to be a relevance filter and to screen off irrelevant information and allow into processing, deeper processing, more relevant information. And I also pointed out, I want you to see how all these connections are forming, that there's deep connections between working memory and your measures of your general intelligence, how intelligent you are. So we see that we're getting actually a very powerful convergence argument towards the centrality of relevance realization as, how do I want to say this, as constitutive of your intelligence, your cognitive agency, as significantly contributory towards your existence as a conscious being. And then I also suggested to you last time that this notion of relevance realization, and this is what we're going to develop today, may be a way of explaining that sort of fundamental aspect of meaning, the kind of meaning that was lost in the meaning crisis, that's expressed in the three orders in which we're pursuing coherence and significance and purpose, that sense of connectedness. And I'm going to try to argue that as we understand what relevance is, that relevance is exactly that sense of connectedness. So there will be deep connections between meaning and relevance. And of course, this will make sense, right? See what I'm arguing here? There's deep connections between meaning and all this relevance, right? There's deep connections between relevance and agency. That's the whole point about the robot and the communicating, right? And there's going to be deep connections we've already seen between, of course, meaning and agency. That one of the whole things about agency is its relationship to the arena, the agent-arena relationship, and how that grounds, how that's the meta-meaning grounding of all of our other more specific meaning-making projects. All right. So I hope I've made at least a good convergence argument for you, that many things converge upon, many things that we're interested in, many central defining features of intelligence and agency and aspects of the functionality of our consciousness. Everything is sort of converging on this relevance realization. What I want to try and show you now is how you might move towards, and this has been sort of the core of my, I guess you'd call it my scientific work, how you move towards trying to offer a scientific explanation of relevance and what that would look like and the difficulties you face doing so. I also want to try and argue that there's good reason to believe that we're talking about a unified phenomena, a unified thing here, relevance, that this isn't just a family resemblance term for a lot of disconnected things, that there's reason to believe this is a central thing. Let's start with trying to offer theories of relevance. And there are good ones out there. There's the work of Sperber and Wilson and others, and I will refer to some of that work as we move along. But let's try and work towards sort of a bit of at the meta level. What do we need for a good theory of relevance to do? What kind of mistakes do we need to avoid when we're trying to explain relevance? The main mistake that I want to point to is a mistake in which we are arguing in a circle. If you remember, this is part of what goes into things like the homuncular fallacy. Remember when I tried to explain vision with the little man in my head having vision? I don't want to use whatever I'm using, let's put it this way, whatever process or entity that I'm trying to use to explain relevance should not itself require relevance, right? What I mean by that, if I have something X and I'm using that to explain relevance, what this cannot itself cannot presuppose relevance for its function. Because if it does, then I'm ultimately arguing in a circle. I have to find processes that are themselves not processes that realize relevance if I'm going to explain in terms of those processes relevance realization itself. Another way of putting this is I ultimately want to explain intelligence in terms of processes that are not themselves intelligent. Because if I'm always explaining intelligence in terms of processes that are themselves intelligent, that is no different than the homuncular fallacy of explaining vision in terms of internal processes that are themselves visual processes. Okay, so that's going to be a guiding methodological principle, right? Now that turns out to be very powerful, and as many people have pointed out, Fodor famously has pointed out in repeated places, it's actually very difficult to explain relevance without presupposing relevance in the machinery that you're using to explain it. Let's take a look at some candidates. We might think that we could explain relevance in terms of how we use representations. This is a very powerful way we think about the mind, that there are things in the mind, ideas, pictures, right, that stand for, represent the world in some way. We might think that perhaps it's much more that relevance is a function of computation, computational processes. Or we might think that we explain relevance in terms of what's called modularity, that there's a specific area of the brain dedicated to processing relevance. I want to take a look at each one of those, and I want to try and argue as to why I think they're inadequate and what that helps us to see. And what I want you to see is that, and I'll try to show this along the way, that as we come, if, and I'm trying to make it more than an if, but if relevance realization is so central to our meaning making, and our cognition, and our consciousness, and our self-transcendence, etc., right? As we learn about how we have to best try to explain or understand it, we should garner lessons about how to best think about and reflect upon human spirituality, at least in the terms that I have defined it for us. Okay, so representation. Now, this is just a terrifically hot issue, both in terms of interest and controversy within cognitive science in general. And I'm not going to try and completely decide this issue right now, although I think I'll say things that are pertinent to that debate. But let's take it that what we mean by a representation is something, as I said, some mental entity that stands for, refers, directs us towards an object in the world. That's all I need. Whatever else representations are in all that controversy, that's all I need for the point I want to make. Because I want to show you something very important about a representation. And I mentioned it a few minutes ago. And this is a point that John Searle has famously made. Representations are aspectual. Okay, so I hold this thing up and you form a representation of it. Right? Remember all the things we talked about when we talked about categorization, we talked about similarity, etc. So when you form a representation, you do not, right, grasp all of the true properties of this object. Because, right, all of the true properties, the number is combinatorially explosive. We've already seen that. So out of all of the properties, right, you just select some subset. And what subset do you pick? Well, you pick a subset that is, and here it comes, relevant to you. Are they just a feature list, No, we've already seen that a long time ago. They are, right, they have a structural functional organization. They're made relevant to each other. So here's what we've got. A set of features that are relevant to each other, and then a set of features, that set of features that have been structurally functional organized so that they have co-relevance, is then relevant to me. That's what an aspect is, right? So whenever I'm representing anything, this is a marker. However, I could change its aspectuality. It's now a weapon, right? And we do that all the time. In fact, one of the ways we check people's creativity is to do exactly that. We will give some object and say, how many different ways can you use it? How many different ways can you categorize it? Namely, how many different ways, how flexible are you in getting different aspects from the same object? So representations are inherently aspectual, but notice the language I was using. You're zeroing on relevant properties, right, out of all the possible properties. You're structuring them as how they're co-relevant to each other, and then how that, right, structural functional organization is relevant to you. Aspectuality deeply presupposes, maybe that's an incorrect arrow. Let's just put presupposes, deeply presupposes your ability to zero in on relevance, do relevance realization. That means that representations can't ultimately be the generators, the creators of relevance. They can't be the causal origin of relevance. Now, can our representations feed back and alter what we find relevant? Of course, nobody's denying that. That's, of course, why we use representations. But what they can't serve as the ontological basis, the stuff in reality that we're trying to use to generate a non-circular account of relevance realization. Now, that's going to tell us something really interesting. It's going to tell us that if this meaning and this spirituality is what is bound to relevance realization, that the place to look for it is not going to be found at the level of our representational cognition, the level of our cognition that is using ideas, propositions, pictures, etc. Once again, I am not saying that those things do not contribute or affect what we consider relevant. What I'm saying is they are not the source, the locus of how we do relevance realization. I want to show you how this cashes out even in an empirical manner. This goes to some really interesting work done by Zenon Polishin, right, on what's called multiple object tracking. Now, multiple object tracking is really interesting. So basically what you do is you give people like a bunch of objects on a computer screen. Let's say I have X's and O's, and they'll be different colors. They can be different shapes, right, all kinds of things like this. And what I do is I have the objects move around. And let's say this was a red X. And then after it moves around, I ask you, where's the red X? And you have to point to it. I may ask you, oh, where's the green circle? Where's the blue square? You get the task. Now, what's interesting is how much you can do this. You can track about 8, that's on average, objects reliably. What's really interesting about them, is the more objects you track, the less and less features you can attribute to each object. What do I mean by that? Suppose I'm tracking, that's 6, but suppose it was 8. I was tracking the red X, and I have to keep it, right? I can, after lots of movement, say, oh, it's there now. It started there, and it's there now. What I won't notice during that is that the red X has become, for example, a blue square. So all of its content properties get lost. All I'm tracking, and I need you to remember this, is what you might call the here-ness, where is it, and the nounness of it. Where is it? It's here now, 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 it's here now. Everything else, its shape, its color, its categorical identity, all get lost. So he calls this finsting. This stands for fingers of instantiation. His basic idea is like this. Your mind has something equivalent to putting your finger on something. I don't know what this is. Suppose I didn't know what it was. I put my finger on it. I don't know what it is. I just know it's here nowness. It's here now. It's here now. Here and now are indexicals. These are terms that just refer to the context of the speaker. So here now, right? And it moves around, and my mind can keep in touch. Notice my language. In touch, in contact, in touch with, right, something. But that's all it's doing. It's just tracking the here nowness. Well, that's really cool. Now, why do we have this ability? Well, first of all, I'm going to propose a way of thinking about this. He doesn't use this language, but I think it'll be helpful. I don't think it's in any way inconsistent. This ability to do this is like salience tagging. Okay? When I touch this, I'm making this here nowness salient to me. This here now is salient to me. Not the bottle, not even the flat surface, because remember, I lose all of those particular qualities. All I have is the here nowness is salient to me. Right? And we do this with demonstrative terms, like this. Notice the word this is not like the word cat. Cat refers you to a specific thing. Meow, meow, the animal that pretends to love you. Actually, I know some cats now that I'm actually convinced do love me. So I have to amend my usual comments about cats, right? But this isn't like cat. This can go, watch, this, okay? It doesn't refer to a specific thing. It picks out, it does a salient, it makes something. It doesn't make something. It just makes some here-ness and now-ness, sorry for talking about this, but this is how we have to talk, salient to you. Now, I want you to pick up on something I just said with this. Terms like this and here and now, but especially this, these are linguistic terms, and they do what's called demonstrative reference. They do not refer to a particular thing. They do not refer to the bottle or to the marker or to wall, but this. Okay? All they do is salience tagging, this and that. Now, why is that important? Well, Polition wants you to understand Finsting. Finsting is obviously not a linguistic phenomenon. I'm not speaking in my head when I'm doing this. In fact, if you try and speak in your head, you're going to mess yourself up. So he's using demonstrative reference as a linguistic analogy for something you enact. So I'm going to try and draw that out by calling it enactive demonstrative reference rather than linguistic demonstrative reference. So enactive demonstrative reference.
Inactive. Demonstrative.
Oh, yeah, you could have just kept going on that one, but we're going to have to...
We'll have to pause for Vervaeke.
Cut them up.
So we can make sure we're tracking here.
Yeah. So,
he called back to aspectuality, the set of relevant features that fit together. We were learned about.
That's what an aspect is. Mm-hmm. Like when somebody asks you, like, name an aspect of a mammal. Mm-hmm. Well, an aspect of a mammal produces milk and gives birth to live young. So the set of relevant features. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, okay, well,
there's the relevance again.
Yeah, it's okay. It's relevant. What is relevant with differentiating a mammal from a reptile is lactation and live birth.
We're still trying to define what's relevant, though, without a circular reasoning argument. So he's drawing out his convergent argument and his divergent arguments here. And we're focusing on the convergence arguments right now, right? The relevance realization significantly contributes to consciousness. We know this. We don't know how. But we notice that it's deeply connected to our sense of meaning, purpose, and connectedness. It allows us agency, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. Yeah,
and that was like the tail end of the explanation of the last episode, which is important because now these episodes are really starting to bleed together. Working memory as well as your working memory is. I wrote this down is because it's your relevance filter is your working memory.
What you're holding, what's relevant?
Yeah,
in your working memory. That's right. So whatever we use to explain relevance can't itself use relevance. We're trying to avoid circular arguments.
Yeah.
And so we're listening kind of what are the mistakes to avoid through this part
precisely.
of the video.
So what do we need to explain the relevance, and what are the mistakes that we should stay away from? And one of the biggest ones is the circular explanation.
Yeah, because we can't presuppose relevance in the machinery that's used to explain it.
Yeah.
And that's really tricky. It's like trying to explain intelligence without processes that are themselves intelligent. How do you do that?
Well,
it's very
like,
powerful and very difficult.
Well, like trying to explain like a chicken egg. Well, what's a chicken egg? Well, a chicken egg is the external ovum of a chicken. Mm-hmm. You're assuming chicken in that explanation and ovum, which is egg. So you're just explaining, well, a chicken egg is a chicken egg.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's like trying to say...
So we got to stay away from that because there is no garnering of insightful information.
Yeah, it's like trying to say, why
that.
does a tree have leaves? Because it's a tree.
Yeah,
That's a circular reason. It doesn't explain anything. So it's...
Brondo has what plants crave.
Brondo. Dude, I'm still saying
That was
I would vote.
Idiocracy. That's a really good
I would
movie
vote for
too.
Camacho.
Oh, yeah, man.
Really, I would not, but you can see people are willing to vote for that nowadays.
Hey, well, the best thing he ever did was picking not sure for his, the fix-it guy. He's not sure. Sometimes it's appropriate to say, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. Like, really.
So we know that figuring this out will be powerful, but it's going to be very difficult for us to do it.
Yeah. So how do we explain intelligence without using intelligence to explain intelligence?
Yes,
and
we try different ways.
And it's difficult.
It is, we try representation, and through representation, so there's three different ways we can try and explain relevance. Representation, computation, or modulation. Modulation being like there's a part of the brain that's specifically dedicated to relevance realization.
Oh, a module, a thing.
Like a module.
Yes.
So if relevance realization is central to meaning making, cognition, awareness, etc., how does it relate to spirituality, to our spiritual teachings of the past, how they taught us what was relevant?
Well, and I'm glad this is being brought up too, because it's like, like spirituality, on one end it can get very repressive, and on the other end it can get so open-minded your brain falls out.
Yeah.
But it's still something that's key to being human, because from the earliest things we can find of people explaining things, or just the remnants of them doing things, there is something spiritual in there. So it's going to be in you one way or another.
Right.
So we're going to have to figure out what to do with it and what it does.
Yeah, because humans, regardless of culture, throughout time, have always tried to find a way to create a relationship with the ineffable, with the incomprehensible.
And
so
you could call that the
come
spirit,
up with stories
the thing that's in all that is ineffable.
Yeah, and not just stories. We come up with techniques, technologies, like meditation and things like that. Yeah. So, so we can at least get an experiential knowing, even if we can't intellectualize it.
So we got representation, which is something that stands for an object in the world. It stands in place of, or like analogy is a representation, it's a tool that we use that is representorial.
Yes. Analogy has aspects to it. So representations are aspectual. We're utilizing aspects. We don't know all the properties of something, so we create a subset of aspects that we can narrow in on. And then, but are they a feature list alone? No, representations aren't a feature list alone. An aspect of something, when you're narrowing in to create those subsets, you're basically honing in on how is this aspect meaningful to me.
Sure.
And utilization of this.
So there's a really good practical example of this is when explaining gravity. They'll have like a cloth membrane tied tight, and then they'll put like a weight in the middle of it, and
big bowling ball in the middle, maybe,
and then roll something around it.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect, but it represents the attractive forces of a high mass object on other objects. Even though there's fallacies within it, well, it's within a gravity environment. It is actually a single 2D plane opposed to the 3D plane that gravity. But still, it's a good analog stand-in. Even though it is not perfect with all of its truths, it's still good enough to kind of see what's going on
That's
here.
right. It's explanatory enough.
Yeah.
It's a good representation.
And for you being somebody who's studying gravity, to be able to look how things move around and interact with each other in this 2D matrix that you're looking at, that is the cloth with the bowling ball. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's representation.
So, aspectuality, deeply, in Vervaeke's words, presupposes the ability to do relevance realization. So we can recognize now representations themselves are not the causes of relevance in our minds. They are not the basis or the locus of how we do relevance realization.
So not the cause of
Yes.
the realization.
Yes, the aspects can feed back and further inform that relevance realization, but they are not the source of it.
Well, okay, so to bring it back to the explanation of gravity with the bowling ball and all that stuff, the aspects of, well, okay, they're spheres.
Mm-hmm.
The bowling ball has much more weight
Mm-hmm.
within gravity, so mass, than the other balls. There is the aspect of speed and angular momentum.
And you're getting a representation from the flat plane that's being bent and
changed
by this.
yep.
So you're getting a good representation of how gravity plays with the space-time field.
And actually, like seeing the less than perfect truthfulness of that experience will feed back on. It's like, okay, well, we got a two-dimensional plane. It's dealing with weight, which is not just mass, but being in a gravitational field. Now that we know that, we can move outside of that, create a better example,
a better model. We can come up with a computer-generated model now. Yeah.
Even though it does feedback, it is not the source. The source would be the person being like, well, I have this idea. How do I frame this problem, create a mechanization of the problem, enact it? Somewhere in there is the start of it, opposed to there's this membrane with a bowling ball in it, and I threw a ball at. No, that's not what started this.
Yeah,
something else did. Not sure what it is, but something else did.
So now he goes into how we track the here and nowness of things.
And the multiple object tracking problem.
Oh yeah, he points out that so there's a problem where you can give people a bunch of different shapes and they animate, they move around a screen basically, and there's like a green X, or let's say there's a red X, there's a green circle, there's a blue square, and there's like 8 different objects moving around, because that's about the max that we can track easily, reliably. But the more numbers of things that we are tracking at once,
the less features
we can keep track of. So when they ask you, oh yeah, what color was that X? Well, you will not remember.
There's a good experiment that actually probably most of us are at least peripherally aware of. The spot the gorilla basically experiment, where it's like they had people playing basketball and passing the ball, and they ask people to keep track of how many people from each team is passing the ball back and forth and how many times, and then they have this guy in a gorilla suit that just comes out and does a little dance in the middle.
He walks behind
off.
The whole scene,
and
does a dance.
A significant portion of the people that participated in that experience didn't even see the gorilla. So that's the more objects that you're looking at, the less you're going to be able to tell the defined features of any of them, to the point where you could have a freaking gorilla or a guy in a gorilla suit walking out in the middle of the field and doing that, and your brain's just like, nope. Keeping track of the balls.
I'm trying to keep track of all this action that's going on here.
Because everybody's moving around, and you're like, okay, well, there's 2 different colors. This is the white jersey team, the black jersey team, and then there's this one ball, and I got to keep track of 5 people on each side. So you've already gone past your 8 limit.
Yeah.
So now the 8 going in the middle of it, it's not even there.
Yeah, no, you can't. You can't keep up with it all.
Yeah.
Unless you kind of relax your attention a little bit, and you're just enjoying it for a second, and then you see that thing. So for tracking the here and nowness, you have this. Or he calls it finsting. I forget the name of the gentleman.
The fingers of
instantiation.
Something like that.
Fingers of instantiation. Yeah.
Being able to put your finger on it.
Put your attention on something or your finger on something. Yeah. The mind has a capacity to do this. It can put its finger on something. We use words like this or here or now, which are not nouns. They're not saying anything in particular.
They're taggers.
They're just taggers of what we want you to be paying attention to. What it should be salient.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the mind can keep in touch but it only can track the here and nowness of things super reliably.
Yeah.
So that salient tagging capacity to touch on something, make it more salient or apparent to ourselves.
When you get into quantum physics, and or actually when you get into regular physics, you can only measure the place of an object or the speed of an object.
Yeah.
You can't really measure both of them at the same time.
Whoa.
So you got this object, it's here and going that way.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you measure how fast it's going, you're not sure which direction it's going and exactly where it's at. It's, you
got to track it for
in
a
our
long
freaking
time before
math
you can
too,
figure it
man.
out. Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
just our brains, it's in the math too. Yeah. So this here now, they're demonstrative. They demonstrate where a thing is. I'm demonstrating where it is.
Demonstrative references.
Here. Okay, now.
Yeah. They don't refer to any particular thing like a noun does. They're literally just tagging salience. So that's salience tagging. And salience we mean by what is most apparent to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And inactive.
And so he upgrades the term to, let's call this inactive demonstrative reference.
Yeah. Which, like, and not inactive.
Because we are inactive,
like
enacting it with our...
Not
the mind's
acting,
putting its finger on something. It's putting attention on something. Yeah.
Not inactive, but inactive as in...
Not inactive as in not active.
Yes,
but inactive as in
active, but creating the action. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
it's
English,
confusing.
Man.
Yeah, ENACTIVE.
For our non-native English speaker
ACTV.
friends, thank you for sticking around. It's in English by two West Virginians, so
English is a complicated language.
Yeah.
We're only used to it because we grew up in it.
Yeah, I'm not even used to it, and I grew up in it.
That's right.
West Virginia.
Same goes for a lot of us.
Mama, take me home.
I just heard that song the other night playing
Barely literate.
from a football game down the street. It was like a mile down the street, but it's so loud at the stadium that you could hear everyone singing.
Oh, that was probably at the high school. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was. All right, fam. Well, we're gonna jump back in here now. I think we caught ourselves up.
Yep.
Back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If you guys are enjoying this series, make sure to give John Vervaeke himself a like and subscribe to his channel. He's got a lot going on over there. All right.
Let's back up a little bit.
Good call. Let me do that.
Yeah. Even like 20 seconds would help.
All right, here
So
we are.
I'm going to try and draw that out by calling it inactive
There we go.
demonstrative reference rather than linguistic demonstrative reference. So inactive demonstrative reference, which I've tried to explain to you with this notion of the salience tagging of here-ness and now-ness. Why is this so important? Well, here's where the analogy can help me. Right? I need demonstrative reference. I need inactive demonstrative reference before I can do any categorization. Look, if I'm going to categorize things, I need to mentally group them together. This is mental grouping. This. That's what mental grouping is. Mental grouping is to salience tag things, right, and bind them together in a salience tagging. So, what am I showing you? What am I trying to show you is any categorization you have depends on inactive demonstrative reference. An inactive demonstrative reference is only about salience and here-nowness. You see? All of your concepts are categorical. That whole conceptual, representational, categorical, pictorial, all of that depends on this. But this depends on something that is pre-categorical, pre-conceptual. And you say, but you're using concepts to talk about it. Don't confuse properties of the theory with properties of what the theory is about. Of course I have to use words to talk about it. I have to use words to talk about atoms. That doesn't mean that atoms are made out of words or dependent on words. I have to use words to talk about anything. And I don't want properties of my theory and properties of the phenomena of the theory to be confused. I want a theory about, for example, vagueness to itself be clear. I want a theory about illogicality to itself be logical. I want a theory about irrationality to itself be rational. Do not confuse properties of the theory with properties of the thing being referred to. Yes, I have to use language and concepts to talk about it, but that does not mean that the thing itself is made out of or dependent on concepts and categorization. I've given you an argument and I've given you empirical evidence towards this claim, and they massively, right? They massively converge together. Now notice, this is a fundamental connectedness to reality you're getting with the Finsting, with the enactive demonstrative reference, when you're getting that initial salience tagging, because it's like the mind being in contact with the world. That's why Polition even uses the metaphor of contact. All right, so the representational level is not going to give us what we're looking for. In fact, we need to think about ways in which we need to pursue something that is sub-representational. So this is in Cog Sci, we would call that the representational level is called the semantic level, because this is the level at which words have meaning, or by analogy, at which representations have representational meaning. So we have to go sub-semantic, we have to go sub-categorical, we have to go sub-conceptual. Now, is that such a bizarre claim? We saw in higher states of consciousness that people claim to have the most profound sense of meaning, and it is precisely ineffable. They reliably, across traditions, across historical contexts, claim that it is not conceptual. It can't be grasped categorically. And they use the language of here-ness and now-ness to describe it. It's fully present. It's like, eternal here-ness and now-ness. So this is actually not a bizarre claim to consider. Now, it's difficult for us because we habitually identify with, that's our ego structure, I would say, we tend to identify with the way in which we are running representations in our mind, inner pictures, inner speech, etc. All right, so perhaps we could consider the computational level as the level in which we could explain relevance realization, because we have found that the semantic level of representations is inadequate. This is often called the syntactic level. Semantics is about how your terms refer to the world. Syntax is about how your various terms have to be coordinated together within some system. So, for example, you know that there are grammatical rules in English about how you can put certain things together. That's the syntax. So in computation, what we're usually doing is we're thinking about the relationship between our symbols. I don't mean symbol in the religious sense. I just mean the things that we're using within, for example, a code and program or something like that. We're talking about the relationship between them. Now, there's been a lot of issues around this, and I want to point to a core argument by one of the strongest defenders, one of the originators and defenders of the computational theory of mind. So this is a tradition, you remember it goes back to Hobbes, of the idea that cognition is computation. That, right, we talked about this, the manipulation of an abstract symbolic system, like generally logical or mathematical symbolic system. The manipulation of that is what it is to think. To think is to do computation. Now, Fodor has pointed out, and I think these are arguments in many ways analogous to Wittgenstein, and you have to remember, he's a defender of the computational theory of mind. He's considered one of its founding figures within cognitive science. So when he criticizes it, we have to first of all do two things. He died not that long ago, but we have to congratulate him on his honesty as a researcher. The capacity for self-criticism is, for me, a demonstrative measure of how good a researcher is. If you're finding people that are incapable of self-criticism in their intellectual pursuits, then I suggest you give them quite a wide berth in how much confidence you place in their work. So the fact that he does that is important, and the fact that he launches into that self-criticism means he's not being driven, he's not being motivated by his own particular theoretical bias. All that being said, what's the nature of the criticism? Well, the nature of the criticism is, right, you have to make a distinction, ultimately. You have to make a distinction between implication, right, and inference. People sometimes confuse these together. So implication is a logical relationship based on syntactic structures and rules, a logical relationship between propositions. So here's an abstract symbol. So if I have A and B, and I know that's true, I can conclude that B is true. I don't know what B is. See, I don't have any semantic content. It is purely syntactic, but I can derive that. Now, when we try to think about implications, what we have to remember is an inference is when you're actually using an implication relation to change your beliefs. Okay? And the thing about beliefs is that they have content, right? So when I'm making an inference, I'm not just making an implication, I'm using implication relations in order to alter belief, changing belief. Okay, you say, well, why does that matter? Because changing beliefs to us brings up the important issue right away, right? The important issue right away is, what beliefs should I be changing? What beliefs should I be changing? Let me try and show you what I mean. Any proposition, technically, it's defined in terms of its logical syntactic structure by all of its implication relations. And depends on, I mean, logicians we can get very technical here about whether or not negation and implication are identical, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to speak very broadly here, because that's all I need. So a proposition, its logical, its computational identity is defined by all of its implication relations to other propositions. So for example, part of the identity of this, A and B, is that it implies B. It also, right, implies A, and all kinds of things. Now, the issue that we have, and this is a point that was made also independently by Cherniak, is the number of implications, logical relations between any proposition and all the other propositions, is combinatorially explosive. Right? Combinatorially explosive. You cannot ever make use of, and we talked about this in how you can't be comprehensively logical, right? You can't make use of all of the implications of any proposition ever. You cannot be completely logical ever. What you do is, out of all of the implications, you decide which one of the ones you select, right? Which one of the ones are going to be used in an inference, right? Fodor and Cherniak both independently talk about this as a kind of cognitive commitment. Which of the implications are you going to commit to? And this matters to you. It matters to you because commitment is an act that makes use of your precious and limited resources of attention, memory, time, metabolic energy. You cannot afford to spend them on all possible ones. You cannot even afford to spend them on inferences that are not, and here's what you knew I was going to say, relevant to the context. Which beliefs do I need to change? And that can mean strengthen, by the way. Which beliefs do I need to change, right, in this context? So notice what? Out of all of these, what am I doing? I'm choosing, and this is what Cherniak specifically argues. This is his term, not mine. Right? What makes, according to Cherniak, somebody rational, we'll come back to whether or not this is a good definition of rationality, but it's at least what makes you intelligent as a cognitive agent is, right, that you select out of all the possible implications, the relevant ones, because those ones are relevant to the context because they're going to affect the beliefs that you've already done relevance realization on as applying to this situation or representing this situation well. So inference massively presupposes relevance realization. Now you may think, well, but I can get around that because logic isn't just implications, it's the rules governing the implications. And maybe all I need...
We got to stop you, Vervaeke, before he gets
he,
on
he
to
is,
the next part.
he is flowing like a
Dude,
crick in the springtime, man.
Alone. It'd be nice to get in a crick this summertime. Okay, so where did we leave off?
Why is the inactive demonstrative reference important?
There we are. The salience tagging of here-ness and nowness that it allows for us. We need to do an active demonstrative referencing before we can categorize and mentally group things together, because we're literally saying this,
Yes, yeah.
and this go together.
Yeah. So
these are all relevant to me. So we bind things together with salience tagging. It's all about here and nowness. It's only about here and nowness.
And yeah, so before we can group, the wife, the birth certificate, the dog, the things within the fire, before we can group them together, we have to create the enacting, not inactive demonstration, demonstrating reference for these things. Well, the wife is... It's my wife.
All the things
the
that
birth
matter to me,
certificate.
'cause I'm in
It's
an
hard.
emergency.
It's hard to get another one. The dog.
Yeah, the here
I
and
love the
nowness
dog,
of emergency, of fire, makes all these other things salient to you.
In particular, like psychologically speaking, as well as emotionally speaking, those things happen very quickly in a split decision. It's like you see those.
Oh, this happened in microseconds.
See those short videos of really cool people doing things like I don't know, someone's about to cross the road, and the last second they just put out their hand and stop them, and the car goes flying. Actually, that happened to me when I was a kid with one of my mom's boyfriends, Roland. Hey, Roland, if you're out there, you saved my life. But yeah, now we're getting ice cream going across the road, and he wasn't looking. He was looking, but not looking too much, and I was looking, but not looking too much, and I just felt his hand that felt like a bar of hard steel on my chest, and it just stopped me, and the car went, wow. It's like, whoa, split second.
Wow.
So before he could categorize the situation, there was what's important, what's going on. One important thing was the girlfriend's kid. Another one
his
was
care for
we're
you,
in
put you at the
in
forefront
traffic
of his consciousness.
But it happens in that split second before you can make categories of everything. What is important happens before the categories of things.
Yes. That's right.
And I don't know if it's just a natural instinct kind of thing, or if it's from reiterated programming we've done with ourselves as a species over the hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years leading up to our species, or what. But it's it's in there deep in order to...
So deep, yeah, because it's pre-conceptual. It's like you're saying, it's before you even think about it. And all of our concepts are categorical, but you're not going through a categorizing process. This is pre-categorical. So we can't confuse the properties of a theory with the concepts used to describe it. He goes on a little thing there, but he makes that point well. The capacity for the mind being in contact with the world is that enactive demonstrative reference.
Or finsting is
So we have the representational level, and then we have the semantic level. We must go sub-semantical, sub-representational, sub-conceptual
yeah. So this is
to explain relevance.
So
This is so cool.
this the demonstrative end of things would be the semantical, and then there's the syntax, which is the computational end.
Yes, how things fit together is what the
symbolic
syntax
end,
is outlining.
Creating the word apple is a symbol for the actual apple itself. And
Yes.
we could have modifying symbols like adding, a Granny Smith apple or a, Golden Delicious apple or whatever, but it's still a symbol for it. Not necessarily a religious symbol, but an analog, an analogy to stand in. All symbols are analogous to the things they are. Like a globe. If you look at a globe, that's an analog of the world.
Yes.
Whereas, if you go to Google Earth, that's a kind of
That's a computational version of it. So
it's
now
a
we're in the computational level. Yeah. And that before we move on, he also spoke on how transcendent states that the spiritual traditions talked about are reliably non-conceptual. And they use the language of here and nowness,
Yeah, so it's like,
regardless of culture.
well, we've talked about this before. So it's like the ineffable things that you can't talk about, but you can point towards.
Yeah.
So it's basically the here-ness and the now-ness can only be pointed to.
That's it. Yeah. That's how I've always kind of told people, like, if you're looking for a good teacher, a spiritual teacher, you'll recognize that they're not giving you a bunch of data to memorize or anything like that.
Yeah, because it's not going to do you no good.
They're just really good at pointing.
Yeah.
And if you notice that they continually are pointing you back
Yeah.
to doing self-inquiry, to looking within, to your sense of presence for yourself, if that's their pointer, then you know that this person's a good teacher. If they're really good at performing that act of pointing you and helping you reorienting back into the self-inquiring mode of beingness, being here and now in the presence,
Well, even the way
that might be a good teacher. But if they're just telling you what to believe and this and that,
even the
maybe
way
not
we're,
so much.
we're training our hunting companions, right? So like dogs, you have a breed of dogs called pointers, or various breeds of dogs that are called pointers. But what they do is they're not telling you, oh, I smell a raccoon up around this way, probably about half a kilometer and 50 feet up
There's
a tree.
something over there.
No, they just do this,
And
and
you're
you've
gonna
trained
have to
them
go
to
find
do
it.
and
Yeah.
then you go.
And then we find. Yeah.
So they're pointing.
Yeah, so a good
to it.
guide is what a real teacher, as far as spiritual wisdom traditions are concerned, is what you'd be
Well,
looking
because
for.
the ineffable can only be pointed
Can only be pointed to.
And actually, a really good way of pointing that we do is, say, well,
You must experience it for
theater
yourself.
and music. So it's like, you would make a play and you make a theater and you talk about, within the inaction, not inactions, but the inactions of these characters tell this story that points to a concept, a core concept within the story. You could say like, oh God, what was that Shakespeare, the To Be or Not to Be, Hamlet, right? Hamlet was really pointing towards the just because somebody else does something really fucking crappy, sorry for the bad language, really crappy to one of your loved ones doesn't mean the best solution is continue with the crappiness for another one.
Right.
He killed his uncle, but he also died from the poison on the swords that he had specialty. Anyway, the point of our stories that we use is to point towards something that can't be described. And what I got from Hamlet was basically, it's like, yeah, well, you became just like your uncle, and you sacrificed everybody you loved because you had this idea of like, well, okay, yeah, he killed my dad, but I need this revenge. I have this pride and I have this wrath that I have to.
So the story has a message.
Yeah, that can't.
And it's pointing that to you, but
pointing,
it's through the art of story. And an actor that's really good at embodying, at enacting his role or her role, is going to help that message get across even better.
Well, sure. Actually, that's. I think that is probably one of the key talents within a good actor, is to take that ineffable quality of the here now moment of what's happening and make it real
really be there.
to you.
To really
like,
be
as
there.
if you were there.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not something you can tell, like, oh, this is what you do in this circumstance.
No,
Nah,
the more that they're there in that moment as though it were real, the more believable it is.
So,
we
yeah.
pick up on all of the body language and the tiny muscle movements, and so a good actor can really deeply embody that moment and that character.
So it's the harnessing of this nowness,
Mm-hmm.
and it's, well, you can have a spiritual experience going to a good play or seeing a good movie or
Yes.
or playing a good game, or the reason why like reenactors reenact battles.
Like
and
a good
stuff
actor's really good at lying and telling the truth at the same time.
Yeah, well.
They're telling the deep truth by being deeply embodied in that thing that they're pretending to be, and the pretending part is the lie. But if they can do it in a very deeply honest way, it's you're serving something higher here, even in the operation of telling a story. There's always this transcendent element to our experiences, and this is what our spiritual teachers picked up on. So, Ketcher, to bring us back,
So we're at Fodor, not Hodor, but Fodor.
Fodor.
His critique question would be: you have to make a distinction between implication, which is in a conclusion, and inference, which is using your implications but figuring out the right implications according to the circumstance you're in now.
Right. Was this Hodor or Wittgenstein?
Fodor,
Fodor.
I think was first, and then Wittgenstein came later.
Okay. So the capacity for self-criticism, Vervaeke was applauding this cognitive scientist that had thought semantics were what explained relevance realization, recognized it doesn't work before the end of his life, and that's a high sign of a great scientist and a great human being in general, for us to be able to reframe and self-criticize our own ideas when we find out that we were off.
Inference is using your implications, your implication relations to change your beliefs.
Yeah. So
what
implication is the logical
what beliefs
relationship,
should you be changing, right?
Yeah, and then inference is when you're using implication relations to change beliefs. Yes, to adapt beliefs. Changing beliefs brings up what. And then the question of what belief should I be changing brings up that question. So propositions are defined by these relations, by implication relations. It's logical relations to other propositions and all that it implies. So propositions can't be defined in and of themselves. They're defined in their relation to other propositions, basically. That's what we're saying there. So now we get on to Cherniak. To recognize, okay, that's like a combinatorial explosive outcome there.
So the number of implications are combinatorially
too many.
explosive.
So you can't be comprehensively logical. That's impossible. Maybe a robot can, but humans cannot.
Well, you decide which implications are used in an inference.
We have to. And even to get AI to work right, we have to teach it to do that too. It has to be conscious like us to be able to do this.
Or else we'll freeze and not do anything and explode, or just go ahead and grab the cart and walk off with it and explode.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
referencing
back to the robot from last episode. But
so cognitive commitment is us basically asking ourselves, which propositions are we going to commit to? That's what matters.
And there's a high cost to committing to any which one or too many. Like whether it's your time, whether it's the calories that you have to intake, whether
the energy to put your attention and focus on something. You can only commit to so much at once. That's right.
And Vervaeke didn't say this explicitly, but basically what I got is deciding which are relevant according to previous heuristics that you have. And heuristics being things you've been through. There's a pattern. It's somewhat reliable for what's unknown. It's not perfect.
And for what I need to change in this context.
Yes, in this context.
That's why we're narrowing it down. So what makes us rational is that we select the relevant items of our salience landscape to the context and match them to the context of the particular situation we are in the here and now.
In the here and now, the thing that you can only say here and now when you're pointing to it and moving it. And then putting it down here now.
That here and now, maybe that's why we are having such a tough time defining and tracking down the source of human consciousness.
And what was that, Ram Dass?
It's here now. It's to here and now. Yeah.
Now, with the chair in the middle of that.
That's a classic
thing.
That's a great book. Everyone should read that. In fact, it's one of those books
Whether
that you'll
you
find,
agree with it or not,
and you'll find yourself
you
just flipping
should
through.
read it.
Yeah, it's got some great points.
Well,
in
and
there.
also like it's got
definitely from
for
the
each
hippie
poem.
era.
There's a nice little like picture within it too that you can look at and read each poem, and whether you agree with all of it or not. And frankly, I disagree with
Yeah, you don't
quite
have
a
to
bit
agree
of
with
it,
all of
but
it,
there's
yeah.
some great nuggets in there. Like,
sure.
okay, things to think about, things to point at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And
to
for
turn our
those who
attention
couldn't
back
see,
on.
I pointed at myself.
Yeah, that's a lot of what it is too. It's helping you turn your attention on your own awareness, your own presence.
Alrighty,
Alright,
let's
fam.
back them up just a little bit.
Good call.
Because this episode usually, so what I've noticed is Vervaeke is really good
Just
about having pieces and breaking it up, but this episode he's just like slipping and sliding.
He is
right
man,
on
he's
through.
moving
Well,
fast.
there's a lot in here, and
And he's given us a lot of very complex ideas here to keep track of. So I'm glad that we're getting to share this with you all in this way. I hope that it helps to understand things a little bit better as we try and work it out and understand it and recapitulate it ourselves. Hopefully, it's serving you all well. So let's dive back in here.
break on through to the other side.
He's going to be loud. Beware.
that you've already done relevance realization on as applying to this situation or representing this situation well. So inference massively presupposes relevance realization. Now you may think, well, but I can get around that because logic isn't just implications, it's the rules governing the implications. And maybe all I need to talk about is the rules. And then here's the argument that comes from Wittgenstein, but I think ultimately goes back to Aristotle, is how rules work, right? And this is an argument that Brown and others have made very, very clear. Rules are, obviously they're propositions. They're not just propositions, they're propositions that, and this is perhaps why you're considering them, propositions that tell you where to commit your resources. Now, the problem with that is that, of course, every rule requires an interpretation. Every rule requires a specification in its application. Let's just use a moral rule because those are the easiest for people to have, right, a connection to. I assume that many of you have this rule, be kind, which means in a situation, right, I will derive inferences, I will use inferences to derive actions and changes of belief, and those will fit together in a certain way, that will result in me achieving kindness towards others. So I have this rule. It tells me which implications to pay attention to, which beliefs I should make salient, etc. Now, what's the issue about this? Well, think about being kind. What do I mean by this problem of interpretation by specifying the application of the rule? The way I'm kind to my son Spencer, what it means to be kind to Spencer, should I use that in how I'm trying to be kind to my partner Sarah? No. That would be inappropriate. It could be condescending, could be patronizing. Now, I want to be kind to both of them. In fact, I love both of them deeply, but I'm not going to be kind to them in the same way most of the time. Well, what about how I'm kind to a friend? Should I be kind to a friend the way I'm kind to either Spencer or Sarah? That doesn't seem right either. What about how I'm kind to my student? Should that be like how I'm kind to a friend? No. How I'm kind to Spencer? No. How I'm kind to Sarah? No. What about how I'm kind to a stranger? Should it be like how I'm kind to my students? No. How about when I'm kind to myself? Should it be like any of those? Well, right. So here's the thing, and this is bound up with the fact that like we have to always convey more that we can say. You can probably see that. I cannot specify all the conditions of application of the rule in the rule, because the rule always has to convey much more than it can say. If I try to specify it in the rule will become, right, unwieldy, because it will become combinatorially explosively large. It will no longer serve. Well, you say, well, what you might do is put in a rule on how to use this rule, a higher order rule. That's not going to work, because the same problem is going to happen here. And this was Wittgenstein's point. You can't ultimately get an explanation of how you follow rules in terms of just the rules. Your ability to follow rules is actually based on something else. Brown calls this, in his book on rationality in 1988, the skill of judgment. Notice what we've moved here. We've moved out of the propositional language, right, of a rule, and we've moved into the procedural language of a skill. The skill, knowing how to judge what is relevant, pertinent in this situation. Now, again, notice how we can't even maintain the two things that are supposed to be central to computation. We can't use inference because it presupposes relevance. We can't use rules, because what is this procedural skill of being able to determine what's appropriate, or what fits in the context, what fits the people or the situation, what fits the problem or task at hand? Well, that's the skill of relevance realization. So we're seeing that the computational level isn't going to do it for us. I want to stop here before we go to this modularity issue and point out something really interesting. Notice what we got with Fodor and with Wittgenstein, and like I said, I think this ultimately goes back to Aristotle, right? Notice how the propositional, and this was one of Wittgenstein's famous arguments, right, ultimately depends on the procedural. One of my favorite quotes from Wittgenstein has to do exactly with this. He said, even if lions could talk, we would not understand them. Even if they could use all of our words, we would not understand them, because their skills of what is relevant or important or central to them are very different from ours. He called this a form of life. Their form of life, the way they exercise across many contexts, the skill of doing judgments of what's relevant, what's salient and important to them, is fundamentally different from ours, because they're cats rather than humans, and therefore even if they spoke, we would not understand them. So we see that the propositional actually depends on the procedural. But notice, and this is really important, if I'm exercising a skill, so I'm going to throw this, or do a martial art block or something, right? That depends on what's called situational awareness. If I'm a good martial artist, I don't just have my skills and just apply them mechanically. It's a great thing if you spar with somebody that's fighting mechanically, because they don't have situational awareness. Now, what is situational awareness? Right? When I'm exercising a skill, it depends on my situational awareness. What is situational awareness? Well, you know what it is. We've already talked about it. It's your perspectival knowing. It's your ability to do salience landscaping. It's ability to foreground, background, right? Formulate the problem well. It's all that perspectival stuff. So my situational awareness is, how is my salience landscaping foregrounding what's most relevant to the task? How is it backgrounding what's irrelevant? How is it adjusting as the situation is changing, so that the way I'm applying my skill is more adaptive and more fitted to the situation? So your procedural knowing depends on your perspectival. Well, you know where I'm going to go with this, right? Your perspectival knowing ultimately depends on how well the agent and arena fit together and generate affordances of action. and affordances of an intelligibility. If the agent and the arena need to be in a conformity relationship, they need to be well fitted together. You've seen lots of arguments to this. In order for my salience landscaping to function appropriately. So the perspectival ultimately depends on the participatory. Now, of course, it goes this way, right? They affect each other in multiple interactions. So I was not originally drawing the arrow of causal interaction. I just did that, but what I was trying to draw originally was the arrow of dependence, asymmetric dependence. This depends on this, and this depends on this, and this ultimately depends on this. So we're getting a lot about how we should think about relevance realization, where we should look for it, and notice it's starting to give us a way of connecting and thinking about the four kinds of knowing. What about modularity? What about modularity? Well, the idea would be something like this, right? And to be fair, this comes up a lot. The idea, here's the mind or the brain, right? And here's something like, here's the central executive, or something like that. It's weird we use a business term for an aspect of our cognition. This is used in psychology. And the idea is the central executive is making all kinds of important decisions. Well, maybe the central executive is responsible for relevance realization. And a lot of people, and I know this because I interact with psychologists, they're saying, oh yeah, that's it, that's the answer. Well, it's not an answer. It's not an answer at all. Because if it's right, it's ridiculously homuncular. Because what does the central executive have to possess? Inside the central executive is a capacity for relevance realization. I haven't explained it. I've just pointed to a place. And the problem is, you shouldn't, okay, so first of all, I haven't explained it. It's homuncular. And secondly, you shouldn't point to a place. Look, relevance realization can't be in any one place. It has to simultaneously. You know this. We've talked about this with how attention works. Remember, that you're always going from feature to gestalt and from gestalt to feature. Attention has to be moving out towards the gestalt and down to the features. Relevance realization has to be happening both at the featural level and the gestalt level in a highly integrated, interactive fashion. You can't point to one place and say that's where relevance realization is going on, because relevance realization has to be happening at multiple levels of cognition in a simultaneous, self-organizing fashion. That's why it can lead to insight. And as I said, pointing to any one thing and then labeling it is not an explanation. It is a homuncular right? It's a homuncular diversion. That's all it is. Okay. Let's try and draw this all together. What are we learning? Well, I'm trying to show you we're already learning something very interesting about meaning making. But we're learning what we need, the kinds of properties and processes we need in order to explain relevance realization. First of all, our account of relevance realization, and bear with me on this because there's an important way in which I'm going to modify this, right? But our account of relevant realization has to be completely internal. Now, what do I mean by that? It has to work in terms of goals that are, at least initially, are internal to the brain and emerge developmentally from it. Why? Look, any goal in which the brain is representing or referring to something in the world can't be the place where we can generate an explanation of relevance. Because insofar as I'm representing a goal to myself, I've already got the capacity for relevance realization. The goals that are the originating source of relevance realization have to be internal to the relevance realization process. Now, what does that mean? The goals have to be goals that are constitutive. What are constitutive goals? Constitutive goals are goals that a system or process have that helps to constitute it for being what it is. And this is especially the case for autopoietic systems. We've talked about this. Okay. Living things are not only self-organizing. Living things are self-organized because they have the constitutive goal of preserving their own self-organization. To be alive is to have, or maybe even better, to be the goal of preserving the self-organization that is giving rise to you. That's a constitutive goal. Autopoietic things are self-organized such that they can protect and promote. They're constituted to protect and promote their own self-organization. Which means we should see that there's going to be a deep connection between your ability to do relevance realization and being an autopoietic thing. Because relevance realization ultimately has to work in terms of autopoietic systems. Systems that have goals that are completely internal in the constitutive sense. Now that's important because that means there's going to be a deep connection between doing relevance realization and being a living thing. Next, so when I say internal, I mean autopoietically internal. Our theory of relevance realization has to talk in terms of processes that are scale invariant. Relevance realization has to act simultaneously at multiple levels, local and global, featural, gestalt. And it has to do it in a self-organizing fashion such that it is capable of insight, self-correction. And that means, of course, and that ties in again with being autopoietic, that the relevance realization process has to be fundamentally self-organizing in nature. Okay. Now, we hit a problem here. And it's a problem that might derail the whole project. And it might make it sound like the attempt to give a scientific explanation of relevance realization is impossible. Now notice I've been sort of playing between those and treating them as synonymous, a theory of relevance and a theory of relevance realization. That's ultimately because I've been dodging an issue. Because I'm going to argue you can't identify them. Because here is what I want to argue. Or at least I'm going to state what the argument is going to be, and then we're going to pick it up in the next video. I'm going to argue that we cannot have a scientific theory of relevance. We cannot have a scientific theory of relevance. I'm going to try and argue that that tells us something very deep about the nature of relevance, and therefore something deep about the nature of meaning and our attempts to explain, articulate, and celebrate our meaning-making capacities. But I'm going to ultimately argue that that is no reason for despair. Because what I'm going to argue is that the fact that we don't have a theory of relevance doesn't preclude us from having a theory of relevance realization. In fact, it will give us a good understanding of what a theory of relevance realization is, and that will help us because we will realize, pun intended, that all we ever needed was a theory of relevance realization. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow. Rough, rough, rough. Wow. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, 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 rough.
Boy, I barely caught up with that one. Notes all the way to the end.
Dude, yeah. I could barely write fast enough to keep up with Vervaeke on this episode.
These are the most notes I've ever taken in my life.
I got DJ taking notes.
Yeah. I am not a note taker for the most part, but for stuff like this, I think it's important because if I want to go through the practice of understanding more by communicating what tidbits I grasp.
Right.
I need to take the notes so I can remember what tidbits I grasped.
Yeah.
And more than just the like you understand because you feel it, and the understanding in a way that you can communicate and explain. The teacher versus the doer. I have the do thing really well, but like the teaching end of the understanding is something that requires the notes for me that I'm not so fluent on, if you will.
I have read that the first time you watch something, it's going to be more entertainment than edutainment or education. And the second time is when you start to actually really start to get that information to stick a little bit. So this process of writing notes is allowing us to do that on the fly.
And
then
it
be able
actually
to
really
talk about
allows
it
you
with
to
all.
like to see where the holes are of like when you're going through your notes, the holes of where you think you are, and then you go through your notes and you're like, oh crap, I got to go back to what this was. And then when you listen to like say the recap from the guy who's writing all of this, and then you further realize the certain parts you missed and may not necessarily be 100% needed for a baseline understanding, but still like
It certainly helps deepen it.
yeah.
Yeah, just the fact that we are recapitulating now, it's helping deepen our understanding. It's hopefully helping you as viewers as well. So,
Well,
where did
frankly,
we-
if we were just doing this without the camera and just watching it, I'd be down for that too.
right?
Which actually, let's encourage people. If you got a group of people that like, stuff, philosophies, all
Psychology,
this stuff,
science,
kind of
yep.
stuff, like get together
Great
and
questions.
read something, watch something, take a note. Like a book club, except make it like lecture club. Instead of we all read the book, right? No, we're gonna watch the lecture for 45 minutes, and then we're gonna spend the next few hours talking about it, and, having a drink and doing
I
whatever.
like
But
it.
like making it
Yeah,
more.
the hope here is to do something similar to that. I'm really glad that you all are here with us. We actually had a great comment on our last video from our friend Caitlin that suggested that we do a talk on Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which I have read. It's friggin' excellent.
Man's
I'll
Search
let
for
you,
Meaning?
Yeah, I'll let you borrow it. It's
Okay, cool.
Viktor Frankl got trapped in the prison camps over in Germany during the Third Reich.
Oh boy.
And I commented back that the book, what is it called? The Story of Ivan Ilyich by Solzhenitsyn is a very good companion to the Viktor Frankl story. One Day in the Life of Ivan Ilyich.
What was the name of that book again?
Which one?
The Frankl.
Frankl is Man's Search for Meaning. It's one of the best books you'll ever read.
Yeah, actually,
really good.
if I can
This man finds...
If I can find the audiobook somewhere, I'll jump on
Yeah.
that. But like, if you bring it over next week, I'll start reading that. But I'm almost through the Torah, almost at the end of St. Thomas Soul, so I need some new stuff. I do like reading, but
You'll like it.
the time
It's
isn't there, and a
intense.
lot of times. So
It's a heroic story, though. I mean, this man finds truth and beauty and light in the midst of ultimate darkness. It's a testament
Is that
to the
not
human
the truest
spirit.
beauty and light?
It's a true story. It
Like,
is.
when
and-
you can when you can see it from the deepest, darkest depths instead of being consumed by the deepest, darkest depths.
I can't remember if it was in that book or the One Day in the Life of Ivan Ilyich or Ivan Ilyich. But there's this beautiful recognition that I'm not even going to go into because I'm kind of ruining
Yeah.
one of the high parts of the story.
Yeah.
So
No spoilers. No spoilers.
Let's jump in here to where we left off.
Every rule requires specification
Harold
and
Brown.
its realization.
Yeah, rules are propositions that tell us where to commit our resources. But rules also require specification, explanations, such as be kind. So there's inferences,
Yeah. So
In there.
like you could, there's
there's implications.
you could be kind
That
to a
we can
friend.
track.
How would you be kind to a friend? Well, that would be different than you'd be kind to a lover. Would be different than how would you be kind to a child. And or
Yeah.
like say if you're a teacher, like they say, it's like your teacher's your teacher, not your friend.
Right. Right.
There,
Yeah. Or your parents.
there's a difference, and for good reason. Or your parents, it's
Yeah.
like,
Sometimes we can be
well,
too friendly and lack the parenting side.
well, and it's even if it's even
know.
made into Japanese is a good example of this. You use different words and phrases towards people you're side by side friendly with, or if you're slightly higher status, like say you're older, you would use certain words to regard somebody that you're still friendly with, but that's younger than you, or still friendly with that's older. But then
Yep.
there you have words and language that you use to refer to somebody who is higher on the hierarchy than you, say, in business. So it's even like encoded into some of our languages, because in the West we use yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, to oh yes sir, somebody you're showing
Show respect, yeah.
differential respect for, usually somebody who's older than you, or somebody who has more experience in a circumstance, or a higher higher strata within the company that you're in, or whatever it is. So that this is core fundamental categorization of relationships, and then how to deal with the different level of relationships. So this rule, be kind, is dependent on which level of relationship with, say, a person, or with the arena that you're in. Be kind to nature. Well, you wouldn't use the same techniques that you'd be kind to, say, your 3-year-old kid, because the nature needs something different than your 3-year-old kid.
Right.
Sometimes it needs some things ripped out of the ground, and well, you don't want to rip your kid's hair out. That ain't gonna do them no good.
So we use selective judgment.
Yes.
Which is how we determine which implications and beliefs to hold relevant. Because we can't use the propositional or computational to determine what's appropriate entirely.
Yeah, and we can't come up with this higher rule that can deal with all of the different relationships within
right.
it.
With merely propositional mode.
Yeah.
Because the propositional, we remember from previous episodes, depends on the procedural aspect of knowing.
So that's Brown, the skill of judgment.
Yeah. So even if lions,
procedure.
yeah. Excuse me. So even if lions could talk, we could not understand them. Is the example that Brown gives. Their form of life, what is relevant to them, is so different from ours. Even if they were using the same words, how they would be communicating would be worlds different than our ways of understanding reality.
What their motivations are, what their,
it depends on your situational awareness.
Yeah.
So this is your perspectival knowing, your perspective. Your ability to do salience landscaping is dependent on this perspectival knowing. How well we can foreground and background what's irrelevant or relevant to us.
Well, and we can actually see this, culturally. If you live in a country that has like a siesta tradition, where like in the middle of the day everybody takes a nap, so all the stores close. So between whatever hours in the middle of the day, nobody's open. If you're not a part of that culture, that perspective, you're just like, what the hell? I want to get my Coke and my Hershey's, but it's noon and everybody's taking a nap. But if you live in a place that's really freaking hot in the middle of the day, and everybody's been doing this, where you eat your midday meal and you take your nap and you're good, and then, well, dinner time's at 9 instead of say here in America, dinner time is 6 to 7, roughly. So that's your perspective changes. So that's your perspectival.
Yeah, your
knowing.
perspectival, and then your procedural, I think, is that capacity for how well the agents in the arena are matched. So this is your ability to do the salience landscape, and I think
that's your situational awareness.
Because the perspectival depends on the procedural. I'm sorry, the procedural knowing depends on perspectival. Perspectival depends on how well the agent and arena are matched.
Sure.
There we are.
So to break it down, so like the
asymmetric dependence.
The method is you're an agent in the arena of, say, like like Spain or something like that. But
so this is the propositional.
Well, this is the
and then
this is the agent being aware of its arena.
So that's the perspectival.
You're an agent. Say you're a American going to Spain. You're going to Spain. You know that you're going to have to deal with some quirks within the communities.
Yes,
because
there's
they're
your
different than
proposition.
yours.
Yeah.
And
Your
then
perspectival is who you are and where you are.
and the procedural end is your situational awareness.
How
So
do you
realizing
proceed?
all the shops are closed between these hours.
There you go.
And I was talking to somebody, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we're all taking a nap, dude." Like,
And this,
it's
so this
too
leads
hot.
to the participatory level
Yeah.
of knowing.
Well, and the thing is they're kind of intertwined too, because if you grow up in it, participation would be automatic, right? Because you've been doing it for so long. It's a traditional thing to do. But your situational awareness realizes like, oh, I can't shop for my Coca-Cola and Hershey's between these hours because this is what's happening here. And then, well, I can modify my behavior. Great, I'll take a nap in those areas
So
too.
I
I'll
modify
wake
how
up
I
and,
proceed
yes,
here.
yeah. So
So now we tried to explain this through modularity. How is the brain doing relevance realization? Because we've recognized it isn't doing it merely through categorization or representation. It's not doing it through computation.
before we get into that real quick, though, where you were kind of getting at, so the arrow of difference.
Yes.
So you could say it starts as procedural knowing.
Well, it starts with propositional, then perspectival, then procedural, then participatory.
Okay.
I wrote it down.
Yeah,
I
okay,
caught
cool.
it on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is, one
It's like a gradient.
different to another is different to
Exactly.
another.
So that's the asymmetric dependence he's pointing out.
Yeah, but yet again, things tend to inform.
They're building on one another, aren't they?
And
Yeah,
then
'cause they
also
inform one another.
reinforcing back non-linearly as well.
Yes. Our brain's doing all this at once. Every time that we ask somebody, "Hey, I'm out of gas. Where's the gas station?"
Yeah. So modularity.
So, is relevance realization happening in the central executive part of the brain?
Yeah. What is the central executive? Well, that's the homuncular fallacy right there, right?
Well, you're pointing to a place where relevance realization happens, but that doesn't explain how.
Yeah,
Right.
because that central executive is having a relevance realization, which gives you a relevance realization, which means that central executive has to have something that gives it a relevance realization.
It's part of what executes the decision making, but relevance realization has to work in an integrated fashion on multiple levels of cognition in a self-organizing fashion. So it can't just be happening in the central executive part of the brain.
So what does that central
So what does that
executive
thing do?
possess? What does that have? Like what, without delving into the homuncular fallacy, like what does that central executive have?
Not enough to do relevance realization is what Vervaeke's getting at. So we know that attention knows how to move from detail or features to gestalt and back, and gestalt to features.
Yeah, you can.
So our explanation has to work in a way that explains how the brain recognizes goals, is where Vervaeke gets to here. Goals must be internal to relevance realization.
Yeah, so you could imagine relevance realization, put that in the middle, and then at one end you have features coming in, and one end you have gestalt coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And both of these things and all of these things are within relevance realization or self-organizing themselves.
Mm-hmm. In an autopoetic
Insight.
fashion. Yes. In like an automatic fashion, that in a way that only a living thing can seem to do. Only living things are autopoetic. So we know that goals must be constitutive, autopoetically internal, in order to promote self-organization. So there's a deep connection between relevance realization and being a living being. This is why once we figure out a way to teach AI how to do relevance realization, then we're quite possibly going to have AGI on our hands. But can that be done now? Or can it be done enough to fake it anyway?
So the autopoetic,
Self-organizing by its very nature.
to protect and promote.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to, I guess, protect the previous realizations and promote the further gathering or obtaining of new revelations without destroying previous revelations. That's what I got out of the protect and promote.
Yeah, it might
end of
reframe them
this.
for us, but it doesn't need to erase them to do this.
Well, sure, like
It just needs to reframe them.
when you
redefine
learn
them.
new things, you don't just forget the things that you believed before.
You actually understand why it wasn't relevant,
Yes,
and why
yeah.
the directionality maybe of your intuition was going in the right direction. It just latched onto the wrong thing. So we have a problem now. We cannot have, perhaps, this is what Vervaeke is proposing, that we can't actually have a scientific theory of what relevance is. We just know that we can still understand what relevance realization is, even if we can explain how precisely it works. We know what it's doing.
Do not despair. You don't have to be able to poke it with a probe in order to start to understand what it does.
And utilize it. Yeah. So it remains a mystery right now as far as neuroscience is concerned. Now, this series is a couple of years old at this point, so maybe look at some of Vervaeke's newer videos and other neuroscientists, neurologists, cognitive scientists episodes, perhaps. I know that Ian McGilchrist is doing really fascinating work on fundamental nature of reality and our brains. He's got some very compelling ideas that he's been sharing. There's a lot of people at the forefront of this, but I do suspect that we're still kind of floating in that area of not quite understanding.
Well, it's kind of cool though,
how the brain does this.
We're going through this.
Still don't understand consciousness.
We're going through this that is like a few years old as it is, but then as we're going through, we can look into the future, which is the more recent stuff compared to what we're going through, and see what the fruition of some of these thoughts and procedures that we're discussing now are getting to.
Yeah. Oh, I've been holding back on diving deeply into his new series on wisdom, but he's got a whole other new series going on that's building off of this series. Yeah, for sure. And there's so many great conversations he's been having with so many people as well on his channel, and he's also sharing the enactment of dialogos, which is a new form of conversation, new form of interaction. Not even new; it's an old form that we forgot about. Yeah. It's basically an old capacity that humans have had for a long time.
To quote Graham Hancock, we were a species with amnesia. Yeah. And that's for one of our commenters.
Yeah, no doubt, man.
For sure.
Graham Hancock is awesome.
But we'll call it the baby in the bathwater fallacy that humans really fall into a lot. Is while coming into novel ideas and understandings, we do have a tendency to throw out more than we should while we're going into it.
Yeah, we do.
So that could probably amount to a lot of the lost information. It wasn't just the burning of Alexandria or maybe a huge impact, just the stuff that we throw out because we're coming into new understandings of things. And that's where people who appreciate history and philosophy and can look at things over time, that's why that's important, is to regather maybe the bits that we shouldn't have thrown out, and then make really sure that the other bits should have been thrown out.
Yeah, and we got to understand why they needed to be thrown out and keep that information relevant and available for us.
And even why they need to come back, too. Because at certain periods of time...
some of those ideas maybe didn't need to be thrown out.
Or at that period of time needed to be thrown out for something to happen, but then you have to come back and reclaim it. Because, time...
We understand it, see it in a new frame.
Relevance realization isn't just a direct line.
That's a really good point, because one of the problems that we have as humans is that we can get very attached to our ideas. This is our ego. We're so attached to our ideas. So when we disprove a previous idea, there is kind of there's a motivation to destroy the old, like you were saying.
Yeah,
and just erase it all.
For better or for worse.
It was all wrong.
Yeah.
And that, for better or for worse. And that's unfortunate.
It's either all wrong or I'm going to pick and choose.
Because we need to know why it was wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to teach and understand that.
Yeah, and also applies.
Because then it's going to sprout back up again in a new form later on if you don't do that in a comprehensive fashion.
And, it's like, So
keep the knowledge available. This is why free speech is so important too. You got to be able to have these arguments out in the open. If there's a very controversial subject, there's certain groups of people that say horrible things sometimes, but you got to keep that stuff out in the air and don't let it fester in a dark corner.
So we can all agree that that's wrong.
We got to call it out in the public square in front of everybody.
Well, we got to
why it's a bad idea and come up with a really good argument.
Square first, though.
Well, Well, you need a properly functioning public square to do this. That's not censoring itself to the nth degree. But if you can find that, then in those places we can have these conversations, and even the most difficult, controversial subjects can come up, and we can say why this particular idea is so wrong in front of everybody, so that it is not going to be able to, like I said, fester in a dark corner or be utilized by people to convince people that are unknowing about the arguments against it. Yep. So it's very important for bad ideas to be able to be aired out in the public square. You need free speech, absolutely, to have a free country. It's the most
a free mind.
I
don't know who said it, but if you can't speak, you can't think.
That's true too.
I don't know who said it first, but that's
I know Peterson said that, among others. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's very much true. If you can't speak, you can't think, and that it's also being communal and having language helps us understand.
Yeah, and we as a species, we think together more than we realize. We're all building off of each other and everyone and everything that came before us. So it's
I'd venture to say
very detrimental to us to cut off from each other when we do that.
I'd venture to say that we've actually very rarely truly just think by ourselves for ourselves. So almost everything we do is thinking about somebody else, whether it's what they think or what my responsibilities are.
Just about every word that someone invented, and speech, language itself, we've been working on for thousands of years, communally working on.
Well, if you've never fallen out of the tree, you know there's risks of falling out of the tree because you've seen somebody or heard a story about somebody falling out of a tree.
Right. And how rare are new ideas, completely new ideas? Because every idea that we have has been said before us in some way.
In that case, I would say
that's why this series is so exciting, because there are new ideas here.
In that case, I would, as far as how rare is a new thing, like a new thought, a new idea, I would say exceptionally rare, but also exceptionally common at the same time.
Yeah, right.
It's like music.
Yeah.
It's there. You only got 7 modes, 7 made chords, a bunch of modifications.
Yeah.
But every song is a freaking new song.
The context and how you think, how you say it, how you form that idea is always going to be, even if it's a recapitulation of something else, it's from your perspective, in your own words, from your own thinking and experience. So it's still going to have its own unique flavor and taste,
Well, you could take the 1-4-5 blues, whether it's a 12 bar or a 16 bar blues. It's either one. There's a whole bunch of different songs that are completely different from the fact that you can just hear 1 or 2 notes within that song and recognize that song versus another song that are both 16 bar blueses, but you can immediately within 2 notes tell the difference. So
that's
new
profound.
Things are exceptionally rare, but also
the same
exceptionally
note,
common.
But how big is that person's finger? How much muscle pressure? When is the precise microsecond they're letting go? And how are they letting go of the string? And how are they hitting the string with the other hand? All of these things add so much flavor to how that note sounds.
How did the technician who mixed the sounds together, or the mastering guy who mastered it all together?
You can feel the emotionality through every single step of the process of the person that was doing the mastering or the playing or everything. Yeah.
So the moral of that is there's nothing new under the sun, but everything under the sun is also new. At the same time,
always a paradox.
Yeah,
always,
man.
Reality is always a paradox. It's so cool in that way. Yeah. Well, this was a good episode.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to the next.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you guys so much for tuning in with us on this episode of Actuali and Meaning Making 101, this special series that we've dedicated to going through this Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series by John Vervaeke. But look forward to other things that we might be going through in the future. And if you enjoy this series, make sure to give John a like and subscribe. And if you like this show here, then you're enjoying what we're doing, of course, we would love for you guys to like and subscribe and continue to join us here as well. Share with your friends and family. And check out our band, American Dharma. We're online. We're everywhere online. Just like this show is in podcast form everywhere online. So look us up. Actuali Podcast. American Dharma is playing a show on Saturday in Hagerstown, Maryland. So if you're in the area, come on out.
We'll probably start live streaming our practices on new songs. We discussed that. I think it'd be a good idea, but
once we get them ready enough for the audience, we'll start playing them out for you. We got some new stuff that we've been working on. Once we got
the order of the songs, and we don't sit there for 30 minutes being like, okay, which part is which? What is this? What's going? Which actually would be interesting to see. But if you're not a musician and in a band, you'd be like, come on, stop yelling at each other.
It might be fun just for a window into someone else's life and experience, and reality TV mode.
Yeah, boy. All right, we love you.
Yeah, I love you guys. We will see you next time.